بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We were discussing the statement where Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions لأن المراد به رواتهما مع باقي شروط الصحيح, and we mentioned the three views, and we mentioned that the preferred view is the third view, that it has to be narrated with the exact same sanad. So now here you might think that we're saying that the preferred view is the third view, that it has to be narrated with the exact same sanad, but you can see from the statement of Ibn Hajar, he's only mentioned لِأَنَّ الْمُرَادَ بِهِ رُوَاتُهُمَا. He's only saying that it has to be the same narrators. He's not using the word sanad. He's not saying that it has to be the exact same sanad. So therefore, to bring proof and to show that Ibn Hajar rahmallah, although what he mentions here, but he also had the view that it has to be the exact same sanad. If you go to an-Nukatul Wafiyya, so an-Nukatul Wafiyya is a kitab where Allama Baqa'i rahmallah, he made notes from Ibn Hajar rahmallah, and throughout the kitab he mentions a lot of notes from Ibn Hajar when Ibn Hajar rahmallah was teaching them the Alfiyah. So he says that when giving the dars, then Ibn Hajar rahmallah told them that وَوَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ كُلِّهِ أَن يُرْوَى إِسْنَادٌ مُلَفَّقٌ مِّن رِجَالِهِمَا. He's saying that the worst is where if you assume that it's just the same narrators, then you can take a narrator from Sahih Muslim and combine him with a narrator of Sahih al-Bukhari. كأن يقال سماك عن عكرمة عن ابن عباس. So he's saying فسماك على شرط مسلم فقط فلم يخرج له البخاري وعكرمة انفرد به البخاري. So you see what's happening here, that Imam Muslim had reservations on narrating from Ikrama, and there's a whole reason for it, etc. It's not a place to discuss it. So Imam Muslim did not narrate from Ikrama, but he narrated from Simak. Whereas Imam Bukhari, on the other hand, purposefully did not narrate from Simak, but he narrated from Ikrama. Now, if you have to just take this and combine it and say that Simak and Ikrama, if just looking at the Rijal, then you are going to get such a sanad that it's not, Ibn Hajar is saying that it's going to be such, وَالْحَقُّ أَنَّ هَذَا لَيْسَ عَلَى شَرْطِ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا, that this here is not going to be upon the shurut of either of them. And then he gives the same examples which we mentioned in the close of the last lesson, where you have Hushaym and his Zuhri. So he explains that Hushaym was an authentic narrator, but when he came to narrate from Imam Zuhri rahmallah, so there's an incident which Allama Khatib al-Baghdadi mentions in Tarikh Baghdad, that when he came, he traveled firstly so far to meet Imam Zuhri rahmallah, and he wrote down 20 narrations from Imam Zuhri rahmallah. Whilst he was returning, فَلَقِيَهُ صَاحِبٌ لَهُ, one friend of his met him, فَسَأَلَهُ, and asked him that رَوِّنِيهِ, that please narrate these narrations to me. وَكَانَ ثَمَّ رِيحٌ شَدِيدًا, and there was a severe wind, so when he took out those papers to now narrate it, فَذَهَبَتْ بِالْأَوْرَاقِ مِنْ يَدِ الرَّجُلِ, then all the papers flew away from that person's hand. فصار هشيم يحدث بما علق منها بذهنه من حفظه, that he would only now narrate from his memory whatever he could remember. But ولم يكن أتقن حفظها, but he didn't remember this very precisely. فوهم في أشياء منها, and therefore he started to make mistakes when narrating these. ضعف في الزهري بسببها. So because of this here, his narrations specifically from Imam Zuhri rahmallah are all regarded as weak. So now if you have to just look at the ruwat, so all this here is Ibn Hajar mentioning it. So that's why it's explaining this word of his here in Nuzha. So thereafter he mentions then that يسوق ذلك السند بنسق ما رتبه به من نسبه إلى شرطه وَلَوْ فِي مَوْضِعٍ مِّن كِتَابِهِ. That's the place which we want to use, or the statement of his which we want to use to prove that the statement of his يَسُوقَ ذَلِكَ السَّنَدِ, that explains the word here where he used وَرُوَّاتُهُمَا. So he says فَيَكُونُ حِينَئِذٍ مَعَ أَمْنِنَا مِنْ ضَعْفِ رُوَّاتِهِ قَدْ أَمِنَّا فِي وُجُودِ عِلَّةٍ فِيهِ أَوْ قَادِحٍ مِّنَ الْقَوَادِحِ. He's mentioning that here, when you're only looking at the ruwat of Sahih al-Bukhari, then you are only now saving yourself, and you are being content that the narrator himself, individually, in his personal capacity, he is a reliable person. But when you are narrating it with the exact same sanad, you get this additional peace of mind that definitely in this sanad now there is no hidden defect, or there is no other problem which we probably would not know of. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions as there, it's on page 165 of An-Nukatul Wafiyah, and that explains the words here when he says ruwatuhuma. The meaning actually is that يسوق ذلك السند بنسق ما رتبه به من نسبه إلى شرطهم. Now, after quoting and explaining this whole paragraph, Al-Malaqani rahmallah, he says, فَعَلَيْكَ بِحِفْظِهِ فَإِنَّهُ عَزِيزُ الْوُجُودِ مَعَ كَثْرَةِ التَّدَاوُلِ وَزِيَادَةِ التَّنَاوُلِ وَإِيَّاكَ وَالتَّغَافُلِ. That remember this year, because this year is like a rare pearl, so to say. It's something rare. Although it's so common where people would mention, like, Imam Hakim, rahmallah, and so many would say that this fulfills the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, but it's necessary that it has to have the same sanad. So he's saying, remember this year. Although it's so common, but many people are oblivious of it. So he's saying that you save yourself from taghaful. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, وَرُوَّاتُهُمَا قَدْ حَصَلَ الْإِتِّفَاقَ عَلَى الْقَوْلِ بِتَعْدِيلِهِمْ بِطَرِيقِ اللُّزُمِ. So we've explained this here last week. But the statement here is not correct. Why? Because there is no talaqi that each and every narrator is reliable. Yes, as a whole, there is a talaqi that the narrators, so as a whole, all the narrators are reliable. But now looking at each and every one of them to say that this one is reliable, and then if you want to take it to another level and say that they were extremely reliable, we find that throughout time there were always those who criticized narrators from Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So you know that you have Imam Darqutni rahimahullah. Besides him, you have Imam Nasa'i rahimahullah, Abu al-Fadl ibn Ammar, Abu Ali Ghassani, Abu Mas'ud al-Dimashqi. Many have criticized until we came to our times, and you have Albani also, whether you consider him as a muhaddith or not. But there were always those who criticized narrators from Sahih al-Bukhari, so therefore there was no talaqi. So the statement of his to say that when they are saying that Bukhari is the most authentic kitab, asahul kitab ba'da kitabillah, and it can only be asah if the narrators are reliable, therefore bitariq al-luzum, it will mean that all the narrators, this statement is not correct. As a whole, we say that yes, they are generally reliable, but you will find the few odd ones who are not, and we have discussed this here in detail. So he says, فَهُمْ مُقَدَّمُونَ عَلَى غَيْرِهِمْ فِي رِوَايَاتِهِمْ. Because they are authentic, they are reliable, therefore they should get preference. So this here does not make sense, because he himself mentioned earlier that asahul asanid, where you have scholars from Khairul Qurun telling you about the authenticity and the reliability of some narrators. Ibn Hajar rahmallah dismissed it himself. وَالْمُعْتَمَدْ عَدَمُ الْإِطْلَاقِ لِتَرْجُمَةٍ مُعَيَّنَةٍ مِنْهَا. So to use this statement to say that just because people regarded them as authentic, so therefore the narrations will get preference, then why do we not give preference to those which Imams regard as not only authentic but the most authentic? And then he says, وَهَذَا أَصْلٌ لَا يَخْرُجُ عَنْهُ إِلَّا بِدَلِيلٍ. That this here is a general principle, and you cannot go against this principle unless you have concrete evidence. So that means that narrators of Bukhari and Muslim will get preference, and only if you have some really concrete reason why not to give preference to that. So he's not even here talking about them being mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim. He's talking about because before that he's saying ma wafaqahu sharatuhuma, and if you have to look at the word here when you use ruwatuhuma, so he's just talking generally about the narrators of Bukhari and Muslim. Is mentioning that you have to give preference to them, and that's the general principle. So again, here we say that this here is not correct. If you remember from lesson 38 also, we have explained that it's not correct. Now here, like I said, that it's not only Ibn Hajar rahmallah, even Ibn Salah rahmallah, they both dismissed asahul asanid. They didn't pay attention, and they said that you don't give preference to the most authentic of all narrations, but then here they are giving preference to a narration because a particular author quoted that narration in his kitab. And then before this, they clearly mentioned and they clearly acknowledged that there were places where those very same authors have even quoted weak narrations and have quoted from not so reliable narrators, so it doesn't make sense. So even though he's saying that it's a general principle and you need concrete proof to go against this principle, the reality is that in enough narrations you will find that there are concrete reasons to give preference to one narration over the other narration, if you are saying that because they are more sahih, you have to give a preference to the narration. If you are using that as the reason, then we'll say there are concrete evidence to prove why you have to give preference to other narrations. Now he's going, so until here he mentioned, remember he's talking the Taqsīm as-Sab'ī. So he mentioned the most authentic is that which is in Bukhari and Muslim, then only Bukhari, then only Muslim. Now he's saying, فإن كان الخبر على شرطهما معا كان دون ما أخرجه مسلم أو مثله. So you take note here that he's using the word أو. So now looking at the fourth category, that the first category is only is Bukhari and Muslim, second only Bukhari, third only Muslim. So now in the third category, what you're going to put, whether you give preference to that which Imam Muslim rahmallah is narrated alone as the third category, or whether that which fulfills the condition of Bukhari and Muslim, that must be the third category, and the fourth category will be that which Imam Muslim rahmallah narrates alone. So the word awiyah is to show, is not to show ikhtilaf, rather it is to show taraddud, that Ibn Hajar rahmallah here is expressing his doubt. So he's expressing doubt that whether those narrations which fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, but obviously Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim did not narrate it, so will they be equal to those narrations which Imam Muslim rahmallah narrated alone? So you can see, because he's using aw mislu, so will they also be in the third category, or will they be inferior, and therefore you will put them in the fourth category? So Ibn Hajar rahmallah, when he was giving the dars, he explained the reason why he used this word aw, and he said that وَإِنَّمَا قُلْتُ أَوْ مِثْلُهُ لأن الحديث الذي يروى وليس عندهما جهة ترجيح على ما كان عند مسلم وما عند مسلم جهة ترجيح من حيث إنه في الكتاب المذكور فتعادلا. He's saying that those narrations which Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah did not narrate, they have a reason for giving them preference, that they fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. And on the other hand, you have the narration which Imam Muslim rahimahullah, which he alone narrated, is that at least he narrated it, he didn't leave it out. So on this say, both of them have, both of them come on to pass, so to say, and fata'adala. So now both of them are equal. So therefore, he says, فَلِذَا قُلْتُ أَوْ مِثْلُهُمْ. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he quotes another commentator explaining this. You know that when he mentions وَقَالَ شَارِحْ in his commentary, it's not known who he's referring to. Some have said that he's referring to Allama Ghazi rahmallah, but it's not clear exactly who he's referring to, because he mentions it with a nakira also. وَقَالَ شَارِحْ, that one of the commentators mentioned تَرَدَّدَ الْمُصَنِّفِ أَنَّهُ مِثْلُهُ أَوْ دُونَهُ, that narrations which fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, but they have not narrated it, the author expresses doubt whether they will be equal to those narrations which Imam Muslim rahmallah has narrated, or will they be inferior. But he's saying وَجَزَمَ غَيْرُهُ بِأَنَّهُ دُونَهُ, that others have all, they were certain that it will definitely be inferior, so it will be the fourth category. So when quoting this statement which Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned in his dars, then Allama Qasim rahmallah responded by saying that this is the exact same reason why we are saying that it doesn't make sense to give preference to a narration just because it is narrated in a particular book. So now here also another thing to take note of is that this obviously is the Nuzha an-Naḍar. So here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, he is expressing his doubt. But as you know that, and actually as you have memorized, because I trust that all of you are memorizing. So in Nukhbatul Fikr, you will see that Ibn Hajar rahmallah, they clearly puts those narrations which Imam Muslim rahmallah narrates as the third category, and he uses the word thumma, and from Usul Shashi you know what the word thumma comes for. So it clearly shows that the next category is those narrations which fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So you may have memorized وَمِن ثُمَّ قُدِّمَ صَحِيحُ الْبُخَارِ ثُمَّ صَحِيحُ مُسْلِمْ ثُمَّ شَرَّطُهُمَا. If you didn't memorize, then you have enough time to inshallah memorize. So looking at this point, that in Nukhbatul Fikr also he mentioned it as the fourth category. And then also another thing to keep in mind is that he's taking all of this from Ibn Salah. And Ibn Salah is the one who made it up in the first place. So Ibn Salah rahmallah categorized it in the fourth category, that those narrations which fulfills the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So therefore, at the end, it's clear also looking at the Nukat of Ibn Hajar rahmallah, that he gave preference, that those narrations which Imam Muslim rahmallah is narrated alone, they will get preference over those narrations which Imam Bukhari which Imam Muslim rahmallah is not narrated, but they fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So then Allama al-Qasim bin Qutb, he answered on our behalf and says, الذي يقتضيه النظر أن ما كان على شرطهما معا وليس له علة مقدم على ما أخرجه مسلم وحده لأن قوة الحديث إنما هو بالنظر إلى رجاله لا بالنظر إلى كونه في كتاب كذا. So he's mentioning that because we don't look at just the fact that it's narrated in a particular kitab, rather we are looking at the sanad. So therefore, logically, that narration which fulfills the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim should get preference than that narration which fulfills only the conditions of Imam Muslim rahmallah. So then Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah, when he was quoting from the Sharih, then he's saying that وَلَعَلَّ وَجَهَ الْجَزْمِ فَوْتُ تَلَقِّي الْأُمَّةِ بِالْقَبُولِ, that the reason why then he became so convinced is because there is talaqi bil qabul for Bukhari and Muslim. So even though Imam Muslim rahmallah narrated it alone, that means it does not fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari rahmallah, but then it has an additional factor to give it preference, and that is there is talaqi bil qabul. So because there's talaqi bil qabul for Sahih Muslim and the narrations of Sahih Muslim, therefore that narration should get preference. But as we have said, that the talaqi, firstly, it's from latter-day scholars, that for Hanafis we only accept the talaqi which happened in Khairul Qurun, and latest it is until the year 220. These kitabs were only written in the 3rd century after the year 220. So to say, they just missed the boat. They wrote it after the year 220. But then Sheikh Awama points out another important thing. He also mentions it in his footnotes of Tadrib. So he's saying that you must know that when Imam, so he mentions it briefly in his footnotes of Tadrib and explains it in detail. Imam Bukhari rahmallah, when he wrote his kitab, obviously that wasn't a time like today's times that you put it on Amazon and within a week it's already throughout the world, or you just post it on the internet and everyone got access to it. Rather, that was a time when people had to rewrite the entire kitab, and there was no planes, there was no cars. So firstly, and then also in the life of Imam Bukhari rahmallah, all what transpired and etc. The zulam on Imam Bukhari and how people then expelled Imam Bukhari rahmallah. So even though he wrote the kitab, it doesn't mean that immediately after he wrote it, now everybody began to accept it. Firstly, he had those who had hasad on him. Secondly, the kitab didn't reach everybody. Thirdly, even those who it reached, maybe probably they didn't read it. So Shaykh Awama is saying that it took another 200 years, a full 200 years, then only the book became accepted. So when you're talking of talaqi, you are talking of talaqi 200 years after Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah also wrote the kitab. So therefore, this whole point of talaqi falls away. And then even ala sabili tanazzul, if you really want to accept this point of talaqi, then what is the talaqi? Is the talaqi that everything in the kitab is sahih? Or is it the talaqi that everything in the kitab is asahu sahih? And if it is asahu sahih, that means you have to accept and you have to practice upon it and give preference to it. So obviously there is no talaqi that everything is asahu sahih and it has to get a preference. Yes, as a whole, people will call it asahul kitab ba'da kitabillah, but it's not that each and every individual narration is asahu sahih. And then thirdly is the point which we make is that there is tawatur to the authors of other books. Imam Nawawi rahmallah makes this point here. So if they have to mention something which fulfills the conditions of Bukhari also and Imam Muslim rahimahullah, then Imam Muslim rahimahullah, when he is narrating a narration which only fulfills his conditions, that means it does not fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari. So it doesn't make sense. For example, in Musnad Ahmad, if you have a narration there which fulfills the conditions of Bukhari and Muslims, it doesn't make sense to prefer the narration which Imam Muslim narrated just because Imam Muslim rahimahullah narrated it. So this here is with regards to the point of talaqqi. Then Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah, he presented another reason why the narrations quoted individually by Imam Muslim should still get preference over those narrations which fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So he said that وأجيب بأن تفحصهما في هذا العلم غاية التفحص يقتضي يحكم بأن ما لم يخرجاه قد وجدا فيه شيئا من العلل الخفية التي لم يطلع عليها غيرهما. He's saying that they were so great scholars, when they left out a narration, it's probable that they left out, or not probable, what he's saying, yaqtadi, so to translate it, it's necessary that they left out that hadith because they found some hidden defect. So in response to this here, we say that first let's look at it from this angle, the narrations which Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah have narrated. As we done, that even though it is less than 2%, but the reality is that there are ahadith with hidden defects in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. That's when looking at it from the angle of the narrations which they have narrated. And then when looking at it from the other angle, we say that yes, undoubtedly, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim were the greatest scholars of their time, and we don't deny them. But they were the greatest, they were not the only scholars. So there's a difference. One is you can be the greatest in a particular field, and one is you're the only scholar of a particular field. So they were not the only scholars. That they were the greatest undoubtedly, but there were other scholars even who were just little bit inferior to them, and they also had the ability of finding hidden errors. So it does not mean that because Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim were the greatest, it means others didn't have this ability. Alhamdulillah, there were others, and in fact there were many scholars then who even wrote independent books on ilal that they dedicated all the time, their morning and the evening, all the time they dedicated it to this year, to finding the hidden defects. And then in all these narrations there is a limit of how many errors there can be. If there are more errors, then it's no more going to be hidden, it's going to become apparent. So after if so many competent scholars could not find any errors, now you can't just make the kalluf and an assumption and say that no, there was error. Rather, you will have to prove that there were hidden errors. How come no one mentioned it? So the fact that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim did not narrate a hadith does not mean that there are hidden errors in it. And it's surprising for Mullah al-Qari rahmallah to mention it without ta'aqqub when he is a Hanafi. He ought to make ta'aqqub on it. And then, so until here we came to the fourth category. Now to go on to the fifth and sixth, so he says, وَإِنْ كَانَ عَلَى شَرْطِ أَحَدِهِمَا, that now you will have those narrations which fulfill the conditions of Bukhari, of one, either Bukhari or either Muslim. So which one to put into the fifth category? فَيُقَدَّمُ شَرْطُ الْبُخَارِ وَحْدَهُ عَلَى شَرْطِ مُسْلِمْ وَحْدَهُ. Because he's saying that those which fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari alone should get preference, so therefore those that should be the fifth category. So the fifth category is those narrations which fulfill only the conditions of Sahih al-Bukhari. And then the sixth is those narrations which fulfill only the conditions of Sahih Muslim. And the reason for this, طبعا لأصل كل منهما, looking at the fact that Bukhari is stronger than Muslim. And we have explained all about the shurut, that the shurut is not known. How does Imam Bukhari differ with Imam Muslim? That's not known. So all of this here has no basis. فخرج لنا من هذا ستة أقسام تتفاوت درجاتها في الصحة. So he's mentioning, because he chooses this view, so he's mentioning that from here there are 6 categories, and the status in terms of authenticity will differ according to these 6 categories. And then he says that, so you have the 6 categories. وَثَمَّ قِسْمٌ سَابِعٌ وَهُوَ مَا لَيْسَ عَلَى شَرْطِهِمَا اجْتِمَاعًا وَانْفِرَادًا. He's mentioning then there's still a 7th category, and that is those narrations which does not fulfill the intricate conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, whether on a whole or whether looking at every narration individually. So he says, وَهَذَا التَّفَاوُتْ إِنَّمَا هُوَ بِالنَّظْرِ إِلَى الْحَيْئَاتِيَّةِ الْمَذْكُورَةِ. So until here he mentions taqsīm, the 7 categories, and we call it taqsīm as-Sab'ī. First category, as you know, it's that Bukhari and Muslim. Second, only comes in Bukhari. Third, only in Muslim. Fourth, fulfills the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. Fifth, only fulfills the conditions of Bukhari. Sixth, only fulfills the conditions of Sahih Muslim. And then the 7th, any other narration. So you can see until the first 6 it only revolves around Bukhari and Muslim. Whereas there are so many authentic narrations which are not in Bukhari and Muslim, and he's putting all of those into the 7th category. So other scholars have presented different ways of looking at it. In fact, Imam Suyuti rahmallah. So yeah, Allama Munawi in his Ayawaqit, he dismisses it. But Allama Suyuti rahmallah mentions it in the Tadrib al-Rawi that قد علم مما تقرأ أن أصح من صنف في صحيح ابن خزيمة ثم ابن حبان ثم الحاكم. So you can look at it from a whole another angle. As a third category, you could say, as a first category, you could have said you will give preference to those narrations which Bukhari, Muslim, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, and Imam Hakim narrated. Then as a second category, you can take out one of them. So because he's mentioning that Ibn Khuzaymah is more senior to Ibn Hibban, and Ibn Hibban is more senior to Imam Hakim. So you take out Imam Hakim and you mention the 5. Bukhari, Muslim, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, you mention the 4 of them as a second category. Then you mention 3 as a third category. So look, there's a whole different way you can look at it. And then there's objections which are raised on it, that what about mutawatir, answers are given to it, but you'll do all of those answers, etc. when you do Muqaddimah Ibn Salah. So we don't accept this, so we don't even have to answer on behalf of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Now, in spite of mentioning this and promoting this taqsīm as-Sab'ī, Ibn Hajar has to acknowledge that it is not possible to use the 7 grades all the time, and hence he says that أما لو رجح, so that's how you read it as ثلاثي مجرد with the معروف صيغة رجح. أما لو رجح قسم على ما هو فوقه بأمور أخرى تقتضي الترجيح فإنه يقدم على ما فوقه. He's mentioning that if there is a narration which comes in one of the lower categories, but because of some ulterior reason, there is a reason to prefer it. Maybe it has more supporting chains of transmission. Or for Hanafis, maybe it is supported by ta'amul, etc. Maybe it has one of these kind of other reasons to give it preference. Then he's mentioning that that is fine, and you can give preference to that narration over the narrations which come in a higher category. So this here is excluding from his principles which he just mentioned here, and he says إذ قد يعرض للمفوق ما يجعله فائقة, that which has been given preference over, at times it will have reasons to make it to give preference to it. Now he gives 2 examples of this here. So he says that كما لو كان الحديث عند مسلم مثلا, if you have a hadith which only Imam Muslim narrated, so that means it's supposed to be in the 3rd category. وهو مشهور قاصر عن درجة التواتر لكن حفته قرينة أصار بها يفيد العلم. But it is a mashhur narration. And on page 54, what he explained, he said that mashhur narrations give you the faida of ilm. So it has this additional benefit. He said إذا كانت له طرق متباينة سالمة من ضعف الرواة والعلل. He's mentioning, and if you remember, they also quoted from Abu Mansur al-Baghdadi and Abu Bakr ibn Furak, etc., that those narrations will give you the faida of ilm. Whereas you have, that is contradicted by another narration, فإنه يقدم على الحديث الذي يخرجه البخاري إذا كان فردا مطلقا. He's mentioning that will get preference over a narration which Imam Bukhari narrates, but it is a fard mutlaq. It's narrated only with one chain of transmission. So that's the first example he gives. So like that, you have a hadith which is mashhur, and he gave the example from the 3rd category, from Sahih Muslim. We can give the example from Sunan Abi Dawud, that you have a hadith which is mashhur from Sunan Abi Dawud. Definitely it will have to get preference to a narration, even which is muttafaq alayh, which comes in Bukhari and Muslim, which he's mentioning as the 1st category. It will have to get preference over those if they are fard. Then he gives another example, كما لو كان الحديث الذي لم يخرجه من ترجمة وصفت بكونها أصح الأسانيد كمالك عن نافع عن ابن عمر. If you have someone else narrating, any one of the other kitabs narrating a hadith, which comes from Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar, then that will get preference. فإنه يقدم على من فرد بأحدهما مثلا لا سيما إذا كان في إسناده من فيه مقال. So he's mentioning, especially if it is one of those narrations which some have given preference over. So here he mentions that the exclusions, and obviously when you have to study it, you will find that there are so many exclusions that there is no reason to actually even put this principle. And then, although time is up, but it's important to just stress upon it again. So quickly to stress that always remember that the mujtahids came first, and they had a shorter asanid to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmallah, Imam Malik rahmallah. Between them and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, mostly three narrators, two narrators even at times. So, in fact, there was no Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim to begin with. So, therefore, we cannot bound the four Imams or the four madhahib to follow what comes in Bukhari and Muslim. Like how Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned here when giving one of the reasons of giving preference to Sahih al-Bukhari, وَأَنَّ مُسْلِمًا تِلْمِيذُهُ وَخِرِّيجُهُ. There on this previous page, you can see there. So in the same way, we can say that Imam Bukhari was not just the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, he was the student of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. So if you want to, you can go study at Bukhara in that time, how many Hanafi scholars were there, and study about the person called Abu al-Hafs al-Kabir and the impact which he had on Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. Likewise, he was a student of the students of Imam Malik and a student of the students of Imam Shafi'i, and he was also a direct student of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. So the same thing with regards to Imam Bukhari is a relationship with Imam Ahmad. We say, وَأَنَّ الْبُخَارِ تِلْمِيذُهُ وَخِرِّيجُهُ وَلَمْ يَزَلْ يَسْتَفِيدُ مِنْهُ وَيَتَّبِعُ آثَارَهُ. The exact same thing. So Ibn al-Humam rahimahullah, he mentions there that أَمَّا الْمُجْتَهِدْ فِي اعْتِبَارِ الشَّرْطِ وَعَدَمِهِ وَالَّذِي خَبَرَ الرَّاوِي فَلَا يُرَجِّعُ إِلَّا إِلَى رَأْيِ نفسه فلا يرجع إلا إلى رأي نفسه. So in short, whilst we do accept obviously, and we will always say it also, that Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are asahul kitabain ba'da kitabillah. This is just as a whole. And you know also what's a very interesting thing, you can read up more about it also, that here you can see firstly, as Hanafis, we are dismissing this whole thing about just giving preference to narrations of Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And Salafis, on the other hand, they are the ones who promote this a lot. But yet, in recent times, if you have to study Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, what a long and lengthy argument he had with Albani, because Albani would mention a hadith and say, أخرجه البخاري وهو صحيح. So he firstly would mention that Imam Bukhari narrated it, and thereafter he would grade it and say that it's sahih. Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda took a lot of exception to that, and he said it's diminishing the status. So Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda is the one who spoke so much about this here in his ta'liqat, in his various ta'liqat. So whether in Qawaid fi Ulum al-Hadith, etc. He's the one who spoke about it, but you can see how he defended Imam Bukhari rahmallah. So by saying this here, that we give preference to other narrations, we are not diminishing the status of Sahih al-Bukhari. We are just looking at the reality. So alhamdulillah, this brings us to the end of the whole chapter of Sahih, and also it brings us to the end of the 18 lessons for part 2. So for part 3, I think that we just carry on. So next week we just carry on instead of breaking, because then in December, so we'll have maybe just 12 sessions, and then on the 12th of December we can take a break for 1 month. So for this year at least we've done 55 sessions inshallah. So we'll continue and make part 3 into 12 sessions inshallah. So then we'll have the next lesson on Thursday. Until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.